Guitar. I got a van to kind of traveling van. To travel around the country and visit jiu-jitsu schools. And a couple of friends of mine, you have to have a guitar when you travel around in your van, because you pull over, you have a campfire, and you have your guitar. And I'm always like, I don't want to learn guitar. It's too scary. It's too much. It's too much time. I don't have the time and the energy. It's too difficult. But I'm just doing what everyone does. I can't do it. It's too much time. It's too difficult. I know it's not. I know that with a good curriculum and with practice, and also not being too I don't have to become, Lenny Kravitz or whoever's a good, he's a good guitarist.
He's a great guitarist.
Overnight. There's no rush.
I'm never going to compete in the world, right? So for me, jiu-jitsu is not about being a superstar or winning it's for my own development. And
maybe because of who I am, I think I have to be amazing. If I pull out a guitar, people expect me to be a black belt in guitar, but it's not the case. They don't expect that. They don't care.
Hey, how you doing? Justin here. So what is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu video doing on my guitar channel? Absolutely legit question. So I've been studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu myself for the last 3 years. I'm currently a 3-stripe blue belt and I absolutely love it. It's been amazing for me on loads of different levels. My physical strength, my mental health has improved. I'd encourage you to give it a go. I train at J. Butler Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Yateley in England. And to supplement my classes, I also use online instructionals, one of which is the Gracie University series, which I do for myself. And I also do their series called Gracie Bulletproof, which I train with my daughter, and she loves it as well. So I found myself in California recently for the NAMM show, and the Gracie University HQ happens to be in California. So I put myself in for some guest classes, which were amazing. Thank you so much for all the people I train with there. Super friendly, really, really nice folk. And while I was there, I asked both Rener and Ryron, the two grandsons of the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, who are the head coaches there, I asked them if they'd do a little interview about the similarities between learning Jiu-Jitsu and learning guitar, because I notice things all the time while I'm training BJJ that's like, hang on, that's kind of similar to the way it works for guitar. I was hoping to dig a little bit deeper and see if they had any more insights into the relationship between those two things, or the ways that they present their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu concepts, because they probably have the most, or one of the most organized systems for learning Jiu-Jitsu. It's a very, very complicated, big area, much like learning guitar and music. So this video is going to come in at about an hour, I guess. I've included the whole interview that I did with both Ryron and Rener. The one with Ryron's a little bit more BJJ specific, I guess. He still coaches 5 days a week. I really love the class with him. Really great kind of hands-on instructor. Following that, I put the interview with Rener. Rener is kind of the entrepreneur of the duo. Amazing amount of energy the guy has. He's just like really, really excited all of the time. Some of the staff call it his energy, which I thought was kind of funny, but he really does have a larger than life vibe. It was really cool. I hope you find this random departure interesting. If not, I'll be back to doing guitar content real soon, unless it turns out that I've got loads of guitar fans who also love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in which case maybe I'll try and get some other guests on from that field as well. Hope you enjoy it.
Guitar and jiu-jitsu both rely on instinctive reactions. If you're playing music, you've got to react to your surroundings, and if you're having a roll, you need to instantly react to what your opponent's doing. So what are the ways that you feel are most effective for training that in jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, it's almost like you're responding. I feel like sometimes I think reaction is a little bit maybe not as calculated as a response, but I know what you meant.
Absolutely. No,
but yes,
that's good. Yeah.
Responding, how do we train that response? We want people to have that, we want it to be second nature, not have to think. Well, just thinking about us as kids. My grandfather, when I was a child, 9 years old, 7 years old, 12 years old, my grandfather, my father, my uncles, I remember them doing techniques with us over and over and over and over, but they weren't the most complex techniques either. They weren't the ones that most people are like wowed by, like, oh wow, that's so cool. It was the fundamentals. So I grew up watching my father and my uncle and my grandfather just drill fundamental moves with me. So my appreciation for the most basic things today is because of how they drilled those things with me. And I think that's the reason why I also can move so naturally and I feel so comfortable in my own skin, especially fighting, grappling.
So is it purely then repetition or is there a way of presenting the repetition that you guys use? Because I know it's super structured, the way that you present the material in the classes is like, this week we're doing these, you've got to repeat these things.
So right now for our students, it's a little bit different. So it's not only is it repetition of very fundamental techniques, but then after you learn a technique or two or three or four, then you combine those techniques, 3 or 4 or 5 techniques in a sequence. So not only are you practicing the moves, but you're practicing how to transition in and out of them. And of course, they're the most, realistic situations, scenarios that you can think of. And those are kind of learned through experience. You learn that over time, you mount on someone, you're controlling the person, they're underneath you. We know that with experience, from our experience, we know that someone will either turn to their stomach and give you their back, or they're gonna push up on your chest, or they're gonna push you to the side. There's 3 most common behaviors. So practicing the moves, repetition, but then combining, a sequence of moves really helps build that muscle memory.
So for me, the one area where jiu-jitsu is maybe slightly different from guitar is this, if you're doing something creative, there are no restrictions, there's no set possibilities. You could do anything. It's
limitless.
It's limitless. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, from my very beginner understanding of it, there are certain things, certain branches from the tree. If you present it here, they're going to do, like you said, this or this. So when you learn, you need to learn then a response to this or that or that.
Yes.
And I feel like that's the interesting part of trying to train responding in the correct way to one of those outcomes, because in a role sometimes people still do things that aren't that, or their body shape is different, so it feels different, like all of the...
Got it. So you're saying when they do something other than those 3 most common, what do you do?
Or they feel different because of, it might be a really big guy versus a really small guy, or a woman versus a man, or whatever, where your first choice response isn't going to be the effective one.
Yes. When they do something different from those 3, then we have to use all of our past experiences and all of our understandings of just the principles of jiu-jitsu, and then give yourself permission in practice, but especially when it matters, you practice it in everyday training amongst friends to improvise and to get a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And we know that in the end, it might not turn out perfectly, but because you are utilizing those principles of jiu-jitsu, and there are certain things that you cannot negotiate. For example, in a street fight, you can't negotiate like distance management. You have to be close to the person so they can't do damage with strikes, or very far away. So when something is presented that you don't really understand or you're surprised by, just remember some of the most important principles. Stay very close, stay very low. Think about your stability, your balance, your base. Keep your good position. Don't be emotional. Don't try to finish the fight in 3 seconds. Keep yourself safe is the priority, not finish the attacker. So when you have things like that, I can't mount on someone in a street fight and get emotional and hurt them, because it's so embedded in me that position comes before submission, before defeating someone. So but back to what I was saying is the improvising and the taking of little bits from everywhere to apply to a new situation.
It's built on the fundamental skills that you get from the others. Okay, so another interesting aspect that I see in music is if somebody's learning guitar and they try and learn lots of different things at the same time, they don't end up being really good at any of them.
Yes.
Whereas if they just focus all of their attention on a smaller number of things, they get better at it. And what I'm finding on my jiu-jitsu journey is that there's so many different things that I want to learn, so many different ideas, but I feel stronger when I focus on a particular thing. So my coach in England is an amazing footlocker. So I've got quite into that as part of my game. And I struggle with the balance of how much to put on a particular thing, what's the thing? Fear a guy who's done one kick 1,000,000 times than the guy who's done 1,000,000 different kicks once.
Yes.
So how do you prepare students for that? How do you recommend, when do you practice your weaknesses or when do you develop further your strengths?
So what we do here is our beginner program, there is no sparring, it's just learning the most basic Gracie combatives techniques is what it's called, 36 techniques. But once somebody graduates from that program and they have a foundation as to how to keep themselves safe out in the street, they move into our advanced program called Master Cycle. In the Master Cycle program, we have chapters. So for 2 months, we will work on a position. So let's say we're doing, right now we're doing side mount. So our side mount is the focus. It could be, I think it may even be 3 months sometimes. So for 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks, we'll do side mount control. All positional controls, how to hold someone down. And then we'll switch to how to escape from underneath the side mount. So we'll do side mount escapes. So you get a good amount of time. And now in that, let's say in 3 weeks, you might learn 8 or 9 control strategies. Now, for someone who's newer, they might only really retain 2 or 3. And we're not too concerned. We let them know. Like, hey, we actually might even say it in the class. Like, this is a more advanced control strategy. So for those of you that are more experienced, it makes sense. For those of you that are newer, don't worry about it too much. Just try to be introduced to it. But there are other more simple ones that we did yesterday or the day before that might be a little more for you based on where you are in your journey. So don't feel like you have to remember everything. It's really helpful for the students because you can really be stressed out. You come to class and you learn things for 4 days, 6 days, and then the week later you're like, what did I do? Forget all that. Do you remember that one class, that one most basic control? That's the one that you want. So what that means is that we're always touching on every 2, 3, 4 months on different positions. Now, while you're always changing positions, there is a constant reminder of the most important things. Like the number one thing that you have to think about anytime you engage with someone is what do they want and how do I stay safe? So your survival and your defense always comes first. So doesn't matter what we're learning in terms of positions, the message of keep yourself safe, we're working on year round, all the time, never ending. So once you can keep yourself safe, then next we're gonna talk about how to escape from positions, inferior positions. So if you're being pinned down by somebody, you might have to escape to safety. So then we give importance to escaping. It's also very important. And then I would say comes third is the control. Maybe you escape someone, simply holding someone down, simply controlling someone underneath you does wonders. I don't have to submit the person, I don't have to punch them. Just keeping control of somebody and not letting them advance on you can keep you safe. And then finally, submissions is the least important. It's what everybody wants. Everybody wants an armbar and something fancy, but we try our best to really build a solid foundation year round and year after year of number 1, stay safe. Number 2, escape danger. Number 3, control your opponent, your adversary. And number 4, if possible, if necessary, maybe you submit them. But in many cases, you might not be able to. So
what was the process for you guys of trying to break down such a multifaceted system as jiu-jitsu? Like, there are so many different elements, and you guys have broken it down very clearly into, and I love the organization of it. How did you go about that? Was that something you got from your parents or your grandfather, or was it something that you guys sat down and went, okay, how are we going to explain this stuff to other people? How did that evolve?
When we were children, I remember my father showing me this kind of like, imagine a whole bunch of photographs that were laminated with little holes on top of them and a cable, a rope ran through them. And my grandfather used this curriculum in Brazil. It was like X amount of, it was probably this thick, like probably 80 photos. And it was just one picture of a move. So since I was a child, I understood the idea of a curriculum and having a plan. Students want that you have a plan for them, right? Their customers, especially America, especially today, like, do you got me covered? Do you have a plan for me? And when you do, they feel safe. They feel comfortable to learn from you. So I always saw this photos around my house. And then my dad made the same thing. He made newer photos when I was a kid, but he showed me my grandfather's. So then it gets to a point where photos is not the way, and we have to create something on paper, and then you create a schedule, a program, and then we ran our first Gracie Combatives classes, I don't know, 17 years ago at our building, 3 buildings ago. And these beginner classes we started to see not only because the pictures that my grandfather used and my father were more for private classes, which private classes were the thing in Brazil a long time ago. And when my father first taught here out of his garage, he taught lots of private classes. But it became so popular with the explosion of the UFC that when the academy started to open in Torrance, our family schools, we realized, you know what, there's so many people, we can't do private classes. So there needs to be group classes. In group classes, there needs to be structure. We have friends of ours in Miami, Florida, the Valente brothers, who they had a cool curriculum. And then we say, wow, it's working for them. We need to kind of bring back the idea of our grandfather, our father, and create our own curriculum with these fundamental techniques. And so making Gracie Combatives, really kind of cementing that, and this is what it is, made a huge difference, and it's helped our student retention. We've never been so successful as we are now.
And that was the first one. Combatives came first.
Combatives came first.
And then afterwards it was dealing with the master cycle?
Yes, and when we say first, I just mean first for myself and Rener. My brother, yes.
Yeah.
So 100%, that was, like I said, 17, 18 years ago. And then we said, okay, there's combatives, 36 techniques. They're very important, but people are gonna wanna learn more. So then how are we gonna teach them the rest of what we learned our whole lives? Let's do it online. We just perfect timing that the internet, just streaming content, it all worked out. And now we have this amazing video library. We've recorded for so many years. We still have more to do, but we just love to record content and put it up there, and it helps to guide our students, but as well our instructors. We have 700 instructors around the country in the world that use that to teach their students. So it's really nice to help them that way.
It's beautifully structured. I from being in a similar game in a different sphere, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
How well it was done. I love the chaptering, the little spots where you get to revise it and the break to go and work. It was just, it's really well done. It led me to what related to that now. So the 32 principles, super interesting conceptually. And I wondered is that something you explained early on for beginners? Because what I found was my first touch on it, it was a bit beyond where my jiu-jitsu was. So I understood what a frame was, but I didn't really get it. But as my jiu-jitsu progressed, the principles made more sense.
Yes.
I was like, oh, that's what they mean by this detaching principle to do that. So at what point do you introduce those ideas? Because I kind of feel like that's music theory for me. And you don't teach music theory to a beginner because they need to learn chords and have fun with it. And only once they've done that a bit, then you go, oh, there's a reason that you can put those chords together. So how do you...
So we like to talk about the principles. We reference them very lightly in beginner classes. And we might say, right here, you apply the frame principle, but we don't explain what it is. Now, maybe out of 37 students, 5 of them are like, yeah, I can see how that's a frame. Maybe their minds wander off on what I meant by frame principle. But the others, they barely hear it. But the point is that it's being talked about very lightly. And then as they get from white to blue belt, it's very little. And from blue to purple, like kind of halfway in that journey, everybody's different, but at different times, people will dive deeper into the principles. We have it set up in our linear program as it's after blue belt. So blue once you hit purple. But many people who are blue belts, halfway in their blue belts or new blue belts, they get excited about it, and it's absolutely no problem. We don't mind at all. So anywhere between blue and purple belt is perfectly fine to start diving into that.
And do you see it as the theory behind the practice? Is that a kind of a good analogy of?
Yeah, I see it as they're the principles that everything comes from, right? They're the concepts. They're for example, the frame principle, the idea of using skeletal structure versus, muscle and strength. So how much of my grandfather's success in his fights throughout all his life relied on his skeletal structure? So much, because he was so small and so frail. He didn't have the muscle, but he did have skeletal structure. So he could keep somebody who was, twice his size from crushing him because of how he positioned his body, right? So how many techniques do we rely on skeletal structure? So many of them. So, and once you understand how powerful the frame principle is, students they learn from us what it is and a few examples, but then they themselves start to make the connection like, wow, look, I'm using it here and I'm using it here. Because we're never going to be able to tell you every single example of how this principle can be applied. No one can ever do that because it's, like I said, it's limitless.
Yeah.
But it's really nice to see students start to like, on their own, they say, wow, I just applied the frame principle, right? Or reconnaissance principle, the idea of like through, constantly visiting a position over and over and over, you better understand you're doing reconnaissance. And if people come to me excited about, hey, I found a new application of this principle. And I might have found it already, or maybe I didn't. So I'm learning from students, or they're just expressing their extreme gratitude and they're showing how happy they are. It's all just, it's falling in place. When things start to click for someone, it really helps them stick around longer. Right? The moment you feel like I figured it out. I figured it out. You can be there forever. Because a lot of people struggle to figure something out. It's always, I don't get this. It's so tough. It's so tough. But when you say that, I got this, I actually believe them now because of what's available to them to help them figure it out.
So, when we were talking before about the different branches on the tree and then encountering something that you haven't felt before or seen before, I feel like for myself at still at beginner level that it is the principles are the things that allow me to make a decent decision. Oh, they've done that. Well, I can stop them with this frame, or I can withdraw to this, or I can control the distance in that way. Again, like in music, if you understand how a scale works, even if the chord progression goes wonky, if you understand the relationship between those things, you go, oh, I just use these notes or this pattern to be able to improvise with. So that was kind of how I pictured it.
Yes.
But at the beginner level, you don't have the principles to use in that same way. So
you need the experience. You need a little experience to be able to see the principles, I guess, in action.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
This is super. Just
you just can stretch out if you want.
Sorry. Last question then. For musicians to get better, we often say that the hardest part is getting your bum on the seat. It's actually getting there and doing the practice. You can want it all you like, you can buy as many guitars and books and all of that stuff, but if you don't actually sit down and do it, you're never going to get any better. So in Jiu-Jitsu, the one that I read the most online is just show up. Like, you just got to show up, and if you keep showing up, you'll get better. What things have you found that you use to help maintain motivation in the students to keep them coming through the door? Is it just about the grades? Is it peppering, like you get a stripe and you feel like, I'm progressing? What are the...
So, the idea of just showing up, just time on the mat, I think it's true. You just need to keep showing up. But we need to think about what someone needs to experience to show up again and again and again. Because I might say, just show up, just show up, just show up. But if you're having a hard time understanding the move that's being taught, if when you're practicing with someone, they're challenging you too much and you're not being successful with your execution, if you're getting injured, if you're getting embarrassed, if you're, fumbling the steps of a move. So there's a lot that can happen that can make you feel like, I don't want to do this, especially as you get older, because it's very difficult to do something new when you're older. When you're 9 or 4 years old, you just grab your playing, you're not even thinking about it. So for an adult who has a job, family, responsibilities, for them to keep coming back day after day, we have to make sure that it's a pleasant experience, that there are challenges, but at the same time there are victories. So they might lose and they win. It has to be kind of balanced. And what I feel, especially, I'm talking about the second notch of a student, because in the beginning it's very basic, it's very slow, you're learning, there's no competition, there's very little, they're not sparring with each other. But once someone hits that blue belt level and they've been there for a year and a half, there's a little more intensity to the practice. It becomes a little more alive and you break a sweat. So what we want the students, all the students, thinking about and looking out for all the students. So it's a team community. It's a community. And knowing the individual, knowing their name, talking to them, building a friendship, but being able to read. Somebody might have drove an hour and a half to get to class. And if they get here and you just drove 4 minutes and you're 20 years younger and you give them everything you have and you risk hurting them, and now they leave a little discouraged. And I'm not saying that they can't be motivated by me. Hey, come back tomorrow. But there could be a point where it becomes too much. So I feel like the people in the building and how they treat each other is probably the most important thing to keep people coming back.
Well, as a visiting student, I thought everyone was super respectful, but I came on this morning and on Tuesday morning and didn't encounter any idiots at all. It was all nice people,
you came back.
Respectful rolling, criticisms and advice, but delivered in a really nice way. So yeah, I think you've achieved,
came back.
Yeah,
I love it.
You've
So
achieved that.
if there's a good program, the instructors care. They have attention to detail. They want you to learn. The information is, it's practical, it's real world, and it's delivered clearly, and the environment is good. There's no reason someone shouldn't do it. Unless they move, they lose their job. You know what I mean? There's very few
External things.
Very few things that get them to stop training jiu-jitsu.
Oh, that's amazing. Look, I can see the class. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome people here with Rener Gracie, like legendary jiu-jitsu teacher and practitioner, and it's a real honor for me to meet this guy. I learn his stuff all of the time. Hopefully I'm going to get him playing guitar as well.
My dream is to one day be to jiu-jitsu and martial arts what Justin is to music. Here we are.
Yeah. So what I was hoping to talk to you about is the relationship between jiu-jitsu and music, because I see a lot of similarities, and I'm interested in picking your brains about how you deconstructed a system that's so complicated into beautiful little pieces and organized it. So let's start with that. So
Sure.
It's a huge topic.
It's a huge topic.
Right?
Well, martial arts and fighting and jiu-jitsu as part of that, it's infinite. It's not just huge, it's infinite, right? This martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that my family had a significant role in developing in the early 1900s in Brazil, and then bringing to America, and then popularizing for the whole world with the UFC. It has started in the early 1920s and has never stopped evolving and growing and changing since then. So it's actually infinite by definition, and it will continue to grow and evolve as more and more practitioners come on board. The challenge is when a student onboards to say, hey, I want to learn jiu-jitsu. The concept of infinity is too intimidating, and they don't want to learn. They go, no, this is crazy. I don't want to spend 25 years learning and then still not have it all figured out like this. It's inconceivable to them that something be infinite. Now, it's also infinitely fun, which is why we get addicted to it. But the fact remains that for a student onboarding, it's just too much. So what we've realized, and this actually started with our work with the U.S. Army in the early 1990s, was that the Army only had 40 hours to train a soldier to go win a fight overseas in a life or death situation. So instead of teaching them the infinity of jiu-jitsu, we just had to say, hey, what are the techniques that if they get into a fight, they are absolutely most likely to need in that moment of worst case scenario, life or death. And we settled on the 36 Gracie combatives techniques. And
so that's where it was born.
That's where it was born. It was born in a need to expedite training for worst case scenarios in very small amounts of time, typically one training week for military units. And then the question was, okay, what techniques should we show? And the way we extrapolated and identified which of those 36 techniques should be prioritized from the thousands of identified techniques in jiu-jitsu was based on the history of about 100 years of challenge matches, actual fights between taekwondo, karate, kickboxing, kung fu. Members of the Gracie family and other jiu-jitsu representatives had fought these masters of other disciplines over nearly 100 years, since 1925. We're actually celebrating 100 years this year. But these fights had happened. They're documented fights. And when you look at those fights between a jiu-jitsu master and a karate master, they didn't use thousands of techniques. The jiu-jitsu master only needed 6 techniques. And in a different fight, another guy might only need 7 of these different techniques. This guy over here used 12 techniques and beat this, kung fu master. So once you realize that even though there are limitless techniques in jiu-jitsu, when you actually put it on paper and say, okay, actual fights between jiu-jitsu and non-jiu-jitsu opponents, that's kind of the distinguishing factor there. Actual real fights non-jiu-jitsu opponent who's trying to punch, kick, or knock you out or whatever they're trying to do, you only need a limited number of techniques and they consistently reoccur time after time again. So our thought was, if we're going to train a beginner, be it military and eventually civilian, let's emphasize the techniques that we know they cannot live without. So that if they train for 3, 4, 5 months, let's just say, training 2 hours a week, that student who quits after 5 or 6 months, potentially because life gets in the way, at least we know that all the time spent in those initial 4 to 6 months were spent exclusively on techniques that you cannot live without, right? You must have. And then once you learn that foundational skill set of those 36 core Gracie combatives techniques, which can be learned in a classroom or online, as you know well, once you learn those foundational techniques, then you can learn the remaining limitless number of jiu-jitsu techniques, many of which are designed for jiu-jitsu against jiu-jitsu, and that's a totally different equation. It's like going from playing checkers to playing chess, and that's the evolution, and that's why it never ends, because there's no limit to the number of chess combinations you can create.
This is interesting. So this is, the combatives is what I would class as a beginner course. So like in guitar, the basic chords, the basic foundation strumming.
Can't live without them.
Then you can play a song, you can entertain your friends, but you're not ready to go on stage yet because you need to learn other things. In music, they always build off it. So is that something that you find that as you go into the master cycle stuff, the techniques specifically build off things?
100%.
Right.
If combatives, Gracie combatives is basically the foundational language. Now, there are very significant number of combinations of 36 things. If you just do the math, how many different ways those 36 can combine in a fight are quite vast, quite extensive. But when they advance from Gracie combatives, when a beginner learns those main chords and then advance and graduates out of that program, they go into a program called the Master Cycle, and that's where we start introducing the remaining thousands of techniques that are quantified and whatever event gets invented in the future. And we layer them on top of that foundation, and we use that as the language. So I'll say, hey, Justin, from the twisting arm control that we saw in lesson 21 in Gracie combatives, if the attacker does this instead of that, we're going to use this new arm bar that's more advanced, but it's still built on the same foundation that Gracie combatives established.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the things in music, that one of the primary similarities is the importance of repetition, because if you think, they say in music, the more you think, the more you stink. So you can't be thinking about the next chord or the next thing. You've got to be in the moment, you've got to be relaxed, and it's all fluid. The same in jiu-jitsu. If you don't repeat those things over and over again, they're not going to happen in a roll. So what are the ways that you encourage people to assimilate the knowledge to become instinctive, as opposed to something they have to stop and think, oh, I'm here, I'm not,
Sure. Yeah, well, there's phases to all of it, and in jiu-jitsu we have a line, if you think, you die. Right? Like, it's different.
Slightly
you think,
more.
you stink. If you in a real fight, if you have to think about what step is next, you're getting your face punched into the pavement, and you're not coming back. So absolutely, the whole goal of everything is to get it to the point where your responses to these indicators presented by the aggressor are instinctual, muscle memory, and thoughtless. They just become your body's natural responses, your reflexes in those situations. Now, to get to that point, it's a process. And I think that many people have many different approaches on how to get there, but for me, it starts with a very basic introduction of the concept by itself, isolated. You learn the skill alone, and then the second step, that happens in individual classes. We have 23 classes where you learn those individual 36 techniques. So you'll learn 1 or 2 per class by itself. At the end of the class, we'll combine just those 2 skills together. Just 2, boom and boom, very simple. And then once you've learned all the 36 techniques, you go to another class called reflex development class, where those 36 skills are then strung together in many different combinations we referred to earlier, but they're done so cooperatively. So like music, we're trying to script this plan. I'm going to present an indicator, and then another indicator, and then another threat, and then another threat, and you're responding to all those subsequent threats. But it's scripted. The teacher will dictate that 7 to 10 move sequence, and you will play that song. But then, and this is over time, you become so familiar with the contingencies that are possible in terms of how these moves come together that we'll often do in the same reflex development class an exercise called freestyle fight simulation. So now one person simulates the aggressor, and my only job over a 5-minute period is to present different threats, grips, holds, and attacks. And then you can respond with any techniques. And this is not prescripted. This is not a teacher who told us the order. It's my attacks that will dictate your flow. And now my goal is very pure, though. It's only to lead you through this dance by presenting indicators and then allow you the opportunity to respond with the skills that you've learned. So a freestyle fight simulation, I guess, separate and apart from full-on sparring where we're fighting each other and trying to prevent one another from being successful. That's another level, which happens in the master cycle. In Gracie Combatives, the freestyle fight simulation, where I'm presenting random indicators, simulating a street aggressor, and you're responding with the appropriate indicator, managing the distance, and that becomes more and more natural over time. And once you hone that skill set against a collaborative partner. I'm attacking you, but I'm still your partner. Once you master that skill and that ability in a very safe and controlled environment, you graduate out of Gracie Combatives, you go to Master Cycle, and now the target shifts a little bit where it's, okay, now we both know these skill sets. Let's try to prevent each other from being effective, not just presenting each other opportunities to utilize those skills.
So in Guitar Land, after the beginner series, most people start to specialize more. And this is one of the interesting things I find now in my own jiu-jitsu journey, is I'm starting to feel like these sort of things work better for me than these sort of things. You know, to do with the shape of my body and my age or whatever. I'm not going to be doing like really heavy knee on belly stuff because I'm not heavy enough and not big enough. How do you balance a whole system like that that's so organized with individual preferences or individual styles? Because everyone, I'm sure you've got a different style than Ryron or anyone else. So how do you balance the development of style with the maintenance of a system?
Great question. So because we're teaching group environments with 100 students and we're teaching a skill set, and because jiu-jitsu, like guitar, becomes a very personalized journey at some point, right, where you do start to customize your way of doing jiu-jitsu compared to maybe one of your colleagues or friends on the mat who grapples a little bit differently. But yet we're all in the room together, and I'm teaching one skill set in that class to the whole group of 100 students. That skill set has different value for everyone in the room, right? So for you, for example, the skill set might be, wow, this is the piece I was missing. I can't wait to incorporate this into my jiu-jitsu game. For someone else, the skill set, the same skill that they just learned, might serve a different value in that they're learning it not because it suits well with their style of jiu-jitsu. They're learning it so that they can defend against someone who leans on that. So you cannot defend against that which you don't understand. So this is the lens through which we explain to our students, guys, you can have your own custom jiu-jitsu. Everyone in here, we're all riding the same wave, but each person's on their own board. You feel me? And kind of you can move a little bit, but this is the jiu-jitsu is the wave, your style is the board, but you definitely want to understand all of jiu-jitsu, if not to adopt it as your own specific niche style of practice. If nothing else, you're able to now neutralize someone who utilizes this skill because you are familiar with it. And if you weren't familiar, you're a victim.
Yeah, absolutely. Good way of looking at it. Again, another music analogy I find interesting was your 32 principles. Genius idea. I massively rated the book idea of applying it to real life as well. Very clever. For me, that kind of theory only became applicable. I only felt like I started to understand it after a year and a half or whatever. Even when I first graduated Blue Belt, I still didn't quite get it. So at what point do you start to introduce the theory ideas? Because in music, you don't teach theory to a beginner. Like to play songs at the campfire, you don't need to know the major scale. You just need to know the chords. That's fun. So at what point do you introduce the theory to the practical?
Well, everyone knows that once you are empowered and you are, right, the principles of any field of study, be it music or jiu-jitsu, fighting, become yours, your DNA. Once those principles become your DNA, then they set you free. Because now your application of the skill set is beyond any script, any circumstance. You can adapt. When you're rooted in the principles of a skill set, right? Mastery of those principles, any situation that comes at you, you can adapt to that situation because you're not limited by a specific indicator or trigger for the deployment of a skill set or a technique. So the principles do set you free. And if we could, we would just infuse all new students with those principles, and they would all become their own jiu-jitsu scientists, and they could create solutions to any challenging physical altercation situations because they are knowledgeable and masterful in the principles. But it doesn't work like that. There's a step that has to come before that, which is you do need to learn the individual basic skills. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That's how you escape a chokehold. Okay. Now let's learn how to escape an armbar. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Because there's zero familiarity with the actual practice of this skill set. And you do that for 36 techniques, eventually for 37, for 38, for 100 techniques, for 200 techniques. Invariably though, what happens is after practicing so many different techniques with the same objective of overcoming physical adversity or aggression by another person, you start to realize, wow, these 7 different submission counters that I've learned, there is a unifying variable in all of them. In all of them, I'm changing the angle of my attacker's grip or hold on me, and by doing that, I'm compromising the integrity of the submission. Wow, so it's like a pivot principle. When you change the angle of orientation between our two bodies, I pivot my body relative to yours, I can affect your effectiveness when it comes to submissions. Well, what about that same principle applied to off-balancing you during a sweep? Or what about that same principle applied to controlling you and preventing your escape from underneath a subject in a variety of positions? So this will almost invariably happen to any long-term practitioner. What we've done is after, again, I'm 40 years old, 41 years old, been practicing since I was 3 years old, teaching since I was 13. So I've had so much time to learn so many techniques that we were able to sit back and say, wait a minute, there's thousands, limitless techniques, but are there a set number of tangible and identifiable principles that govern all of them? And I think people always speak about leverage and timing and connection and control and like these macro principles as we refer to them. But what we did is we sat down during COVID, we had a lot of free time, and we went to work. And what revealed itself to us is 32 specific, distinct, and significant variables and principles. We call them micro principles, that every single technique in jiu-jitsu utilizes one or more of these principles. Some use 4 or 7 principles, some use only 1. But every technique that we accomplish in jiu-jitsu utilizes one or more of these principles. And once you know that, then any situation you end up in, when I end up in a tough situation that I don't have an answer to, instead of saying, wow, what technique do I need from here? I immediately start taking a kind of positional inventory of what's possible with my body and start feeling range of motion. And then I ask myself, what principles will be effective here? And then I invent a technique in that moment based on those principles, those 32. So for the average student who's learning jiu-jitsu, instead of having to do 30 years of practice like myself before being able to kind of decode or figure out in a challenging situation, what we've done is we've identified those principles. We created a very robust instructional series on all of the principles, and then tried to teach our students how not just to know what the principles are, but how to recognize them in situations that are challenging, so that much earlier in your jiu-jitsu careers, you can become the innovator who, when you're trapped in a situation you don't have an answer to, you don't have to say, hey coach, what do I do? You say, wait a minute. Which principle applies here the most based on my knowledge of those, and what answer can I create from here? And in that process, it really is the essence of jiu-jitsu, which is innovation to solve problems. Remember, the grandmaster, my grandfather, Rener Gracie, right? He was an innovator through his whole life, from 13 to 93, right? I've seen him practice the whole time, and got to witness, even in his later years, him being in a situation he didn't have a technique for, but through his application of certain principles, create a solution. And I always thought it was so magical. How does he do that? And he never explained it like as clearly as we're explaining it now, but now we know that process to be one that he engaged in every day of his life, right, practicing jiu-jitsu. And for us to have quantified it in a way that it's teachable, that's really all we did. We didn't invent these principles. We just kind of surfaced them, labeled them, and then made it very easy for a student to understand them so that they could make them their own.
Do you ever find students overly engage with the principles more than the practice? And I say this in guitar land, it's very common for people to get really involved with the theory, particularly older people, and they spend much more time thinking about it than the actual playing of it. Is that a danger as well? And is
It
that
is.
something that you find? Is there a way of that you found to help them back into the practical part of the...
That's a great observation, because in jiu-jitsu you can talk about it all you want, you can theorize about it all you want, but there is no substitute for getting in the chokehold and figuring your way out. You got to do it. You got to be in tough spots, and you got to create solutions. And those solutions can be aided by your knowledge of this library principle.
I'm not saying
but
knowledge
there
is bad,
but there is no substitute for that. And naturally, as musicians age, right, and they become maybe less capable with their hands, but still rather sharp with their mind, or they think, they may lean more towards the discussions, the collaborations, the concepts, and the theories, and less about the actual creation of music and getting in there and grinding it out and doing the hard work in the studio. Same is true in jiu-jitsu. As we age in jiu-jitsu, and the potentially uncomfortable components of regular practice become less desirable, and you go, man, I don't want to do this. I don't want to choke and be choked today. I don't want to armbar and get armbarred. But let's talk about it. So you kind of shy away from the practice and more on the concepts. That's not uncommon in any physical activity, or clearly in music as well, it sounds. So it's not something that is so frowned upon. But I think that the real key is does the training environment that student is in permit them to fail safely? That's it. At the end of the day, any musician who's not playing guitar, it's because they're fearful of not meeting their own expectation or the expectation of others in their performance, in their use of the guitar. Jiu-jitsu, any practitioner who loves the art, who no longer does, it's because they're fearing not meeting the expectation of either a coach who imposes expectations. Why, you're a purple belt, you should tap that blue belt. That's a lot of pressure. So instead, what do they say? Well, then if I'm a purple belt that's supposed to beat a blue belt every time I roll with one, I'd rather not go to class tonight. And now the externally imposed expectation, which often affects our internal set of expectations for ourselves, right? Versus a coach who says, hey, Justin, we miss you at class. Come on back. And you get back there and the vibe is much better, and you can lose to a higher rank or a lower rank, and it makes no difference. And when you train with someone, we're expecting you to lose to lower ranks so you can give them some tips and give them an opportunity to try their new moves. So you create a forgiving training environment where it's challenging when you want it, but forgiving when you need it. And that's how you get the old dogs to stay on the mat. And it's what I think we're the best in the world at organizationally, both here at Gracie University in California and at our 270 schools around the world. We tell them, the curriculum, techniques, they're always going to come and go. There's going to be new fads, there's going to be this. You can't keep up with all of it. But your culture is the rock. If your culture makes it safe for students to fail, people who would otherwise disqualify themselves from the regular practice due to failed expectations, meeting of their own or other expectations, those people will stay involved with the art longer. And at the end of the day, that's all we want, is that people can enjoy the beauty, the grace of jiu-jitsu, much like you do with music.
It's funny, I see people, musicians that learn to play in a band together, develop an incredible bond through the shared experience of being scared of going up on stage, making mistakes, things going wrong. And I feel like in jiu-jitsu it's the same as the trust that you put in your training partner, because they could hurt you. If they chose to not stop when you tapped, you're going to sleep or you got a broken arm or worse. So it's a really interesting, I see it in my own club, the bond between the students is really tight. I'm tight with my guys.
You have to be, right? Because the trust.
But I feel it here. And it's an interesting thing that when you go to a good club with caring and respectful students, I didn't feel unsafe. I'm happy to go, who wants to roll? And just roll with somebody.
No matter who. And it's all based on the culture of the school. And that's all I would say to any, listeners or viewers, is that if you're on the fence of potentially trying jiu-jitsu, know this. They're like sushi restaurants. Not all of them are good, but the best ones will change your life. And the same with jiu-jitsu. You find a great school with the right culture. Your school in the UK, our school here, you can show up even if you're a visitor and don't even know anyone, to say, hey, do you want to roll? And immediately you roll, and if it's the right club with the right culture, not only are there no injuries, there's a massive respect, there's a trust with someone you just shook there. You might even trust them before you even know their name, because you know what they're going through, and you know if they've been there on the mat for a long time, they've learned to care physically for another person throughout this practice in a way that is commendable. and appreciated when you're their training partner, because they're going to be able to uphold that same care for you, and it's mutual. Now, I'm not to say that people haven't gotten hurt because of bad training partners, because there are those clubs as well where the expectation is take everything, give nothing, right? Sink or swim, survival of the fittest. Terrible environment, unforgiving. You can't stay there for any extended period of time, year over year, because you're going to suffer injuries, and you're going to say, why am I doing this to myself? Unless you're chasing professional, right? You want to be a professional fighter.
I think that my view of it is that it seems to come from the head down. So like if the head of the organization, the senior instructors are good, shout out to Jay Butler, my coach. He's just a lovely human being, and that fosters an environment which you've done here as well. It's just...
You're right, and that it starts at the top. And if jiu-jitsu, because the concept is we're fighting, if left unchecked and the students, Lord of the Flies, are left to themselves, it will become a corrosive, I beat you, I'm the toughest, hierarchical rank and posturing. That's what it will become if left unchecked. The right schools, though, have incredible leaders, sturdy, firm, clear leaders about what their expectations are, and the students fall right into line, and they realize that they benefit from this because they're safer if they adhere to the head instructor's culture guidelines, and they can train for longer. And all we want is to enjoy the thing we love for the longest amount of time. There will come a day where you say, I can't do jiu-jitsu anymore. Hopefully it's at 87 or 92, not at 63. And you're like, man, I can't do this anymore because these guys are so unforgiving. Versus a bunch of training partners who are half your age but can't wait to help you and roll with you safely because they get it.
Wow. Last question, because I know you're a busy guy. Competing in jiu-jitsu. So the likeness for music with me is doing a gig. And not everyone wants to do a gig, and not everyone has to do a gig. You might just enjoy playing guitar for your family and friends to have a good time. But there's things that you learn about doing it when you actually do a gig.
Naturally.
The pressure and the things that are involved with it change the way that you can play music. It somehow adapts. I see it in musicians all the time. When they've never done a gig before, they go through that fire and the nerves, and they come out better. Do you find it's the same with jiu-jitsu?
100%. Yeah, naturally. And it's the same if you get into a fight with your jiu-jitsu, or you're a police officer who arrests someone using your jiu-jitsu. One thing is to learn it in a safe environment with soft mats, with people that will tap out, or you will let go when you tap out. It's a sanitized environment for the personal development, and has countless benefits in that realm alone. However, naturally, right, competing against someone who's not your friend, who may not let go when you tap out because they have a different culture, and when you go and you get caught, you're going to pay potentially a higher price. That creates something in your nerves and your anxiety, and it forces you to overcome those nerves to perform in that situation, and you land somewhere else on the other side of that, no doubt. And without a doubt, less than 2% of our students will ever compete and will ever compete. So it's not even something that we push on them, we ask of them, because for some people, Justin, just getting in the building was the biggest hurdle of their lives, to show up at a place where the concept is martial arts. And people drive by for 7 years looking at the sign, and then they finally cross the threshold. And that was the biggest step of their adult life in terms of entering the realm of uncertainty. And now they're in a class right now with other beginners working together. After all those years of trepidation, they're now doing the thing. And it's a massive step for their confidence and their ability. So then they're going to graduate and go into Master Cycle, and they're going to spar with someone who necessarily isn't going to give them a move. He's going to actually catch them off guard, and going to catch them in a trap, and they're going to tap out, and they're going to take care of them, and they're going to teach them what they did, but they're going to get got. And for that adult to be grappled against their will into submission, even though it's safe, is a huge step to be doing that on a regular basis for fun as a hobby. So there's all these layers of evolution to the human throughout all of this practice, and there's the camaraderie, and there's the fitness, and there's the mental health benefits, and the vacation from stress and work and technology. So there's all these benefits, but there's no doubt that training with someone who does not have any interest in your safety checks another box. The question is, are you willing to pay the price for that final box? Or are you happy that you have a skill set that has demonstrably been used by students who never competed, get into fights, and have no problem using their techniques? That's a common thing. So for what you want in terms of self-defense, protect your family, you don't have to compete. But if you do, the risk of injury, right, the stress leading up to that, all of that stuff is added stress and added potential injury. And it will check a box that you can't check in a sanitized environment. But the question, and people have done that and been injured in the process. And they go, man, what am I even doing? I'm 44 years old. I'm here trying to compete in jiu-jitsu. And yes, it checks another box, but man, I got injured in the process. So we don't push it on anyone. We never even tell anyone about competition. Don't do it. It's not necessary. But if they come to us and say, hey, Rener, and he's a 24-year-old kid, and he's like, man, I want to fight in MMA and I want to compete in jiu-jitsu. I'm like, cool. All right, here's what you should do in preparation. You got to do some things. You got to turn up the heat significantly because we're taking it easy on each other and your competition opponents won't. Oh, I see. So you got to go in the room over there and you got to turn it up full tilt on the sparring. And you got to bring the fire so that it's not the first time you get it when you're in the competition. So there's a lot to consider, and it may be true that you can't check that box until you compete, and there may be a unique benefit to that. And I competed many times until I was 22, 23, and then I herniated my disc in my back. And I had an L5S1 surgery at 20 something years old, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is crazy. So training at that intensity for that venue paid its price on me. I paid the price for that. And then I just asked myself, man, what type of culture do I want to create? That high intensity pressure culture where that's likely to happen to others, or an environment where they can train for the rest of their lives with only the amount of pressure that they want based on where they're at in their journey, enjoy it every single day, forgiving every single time, but challenge whenever they want it, all in the same environment. And crafting that has been a major challenge, but we've figured it out. And our school, both here and around the world, enjoy success because of that, because we get the students who want to train for the long haul, and it's been an amazing journey.
I must say, jiu-jitsu changed my life in a really great way. I've always been into martial arts and done sport, but the competitive nature of jiu-jitsu, like as a role where I can go as hard as I possibly can against another grown man.
That's very primal.
And not actually hurt each other. And it's
crazy.
Respectful, and I just...
There's nothing like it, bro. There's nothing like it. Like, and people on the outside go, why would you want to show up on a Saturday morning and choke your friends?
Yeah, rolling around with other sweaty
in your
blokes.
pajamas. Why are you choking your friends in your pajamas? It makes no sense until you do it and you go, oh my gosh. Like, it brings back the child in all of us. It brings back this primal instinct to touch and to connect physically with another person. It builds a skill set that if something pops off in an environment that you're present, not only can you neutralize the threat or the aggressor, you can do it without hurting him. And what an amazing skill set to have in an environment and in a crazy world that we live in. So naturally, there are people watching who hesitate in terms of, can I do jiu-jitsu? Is it for me? And that's why we created GracieUniversity.com, because you might love the concept of a new skill and learning something, but you're scared, and you're obviously instructionals with music the same way. You might be scared to go in a physical space with other people to do the same thing. Might be a little bit intimidating, but if you can log on and watch lesson 1, and then watch lesson 2, and then watch lesson 3, and all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, man, I really want to do this. I'm watching it, but I want to physically do it. I need a partner. If your husband or wife's not going to do it with you, I'm going to go to a school nearby and try this with another person, and you gradually make yourself into it. But the Gracie University Online, which you have some experience with, was designed to bring that introduction of jiu-jitsu into their house so they can learn from anywhere in the world. And we've had people learn from 196 countries now, 400,000 or 500,000 students learning at home in their garages. And then eventually they build confidence in that private setting, and then they show up at our schools. And here's the wild part. Sometimes when they show up to the schools, their knowledge of the skills that they've reviewed exceeds the knowledge of the people who are learning here.
Wow.
And that's the part that shocked me the most. And I'm like, how is that possible? Well, when you think about it, the person at home can rewind the video instructional on that lesson. The person in here can't rewind me. So they're learning for 2 or 3 hours a week, and they live on with their lives. At home, they're obsessing and watching and reviewing and watching and practicing. And so they show up here and I ask a question and they have the answer. And I'm like, well, and they perform it equally well. And I'm always shocked by that. I'm like, wow, there's something about someone who learns from home on their own with that motivation, that dedication that is different than someone who's in a group environment with 50 other people and is just listening, does an hour, and then goes home and on with their life.
So I just thought of something way back earlier in the conversation about the way we learn and the way we memorize, and one of the things that you do is the solo drills.
Yeah.
And having the solo drills is kind of in again, relating it back to guitar, it's like visualization or preparing the idea. And you can actually do that anywhere, and thinking about the movement and doing it actually probably prepares you as well, if not better, for that.
And we do it. We love it. It started during COVID, and then once we reshot our Gracie Combatives beginner program, we reproduced the whole thing. We said, this is amazing. There's so much benefit, and other martial arts had this figured out. The kata in karate, right? Yeah. Or the forms in taekwondo. I'm like, oh, that's all Mickey Mouse business. But then I'm like, no, there's something to that. And in jiu-jitsu, every single technique we teach it's a partnered practice because it's a fighting in person, but you can do a large portion of that partnered practice by yourself before you ever introduce a partner, and develop extreme confidence in the mobility and the actual steps of the technique, and watching and doing and watching and doing, and then you bring in a partner and it's like, boom, you learn it like that. So absolutely solo drills. So anyone who's watching, every single lesson has a solo component that can be done without a partner. So to build that comfort with the material and the movements of the technique before you ever bring in a partner is a natural step, especially for someone who might have some reservations about learning in a group environment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, man. It's a real pleasure to meet you.
Awesome.
Love all your stuff. My daughter loves your stuff. It's just awesome. If you've thought about doing jiu-jitsu before, I'd massively recommend it. It really is an amazing sport. I'm super passionate about it. If you want to check it out, do go and check out the Gracie University. The online stuff is amazing. I've massive respect for them as teachers as well as jiu-jitsu practitioners.
There's a bunch of free lessons on there. You can log on and check them out, you guys. I promise you, once you see lessons 1, 2, and 3, it's going to cause you to question your whole life in terms of why haven't you learned these skills yet? Everyone feels like they should have this skill. So go on there, enjoy the free lessons at gracieuniversity.com. We have 270 plus certified training centers around the world. You can drop in and try some classes for free at any one of those if you tell them I sent you. My only request in all of this is that once you learn all my secrets and you come to California, you promise to let go when I tap out.
If this video happens to have piqued your interest in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and you think you might like to have a go, I definitely encourage you to go sign up at a trial class at a local club. If you're anywhere near Yateley, near Sandhurst in England, then definitely come and join us at the Jay Butler Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Club. Jay's an amazing coach, so is Nathan, so is Tom. It's got a really great community. We have loads of fun there, so definitely maybe come and hang out there. If you don't happen to live anywhere near us, then do go and have a look at the Gracie University website and see if there's an affiliated club anywhere near you. Choosing a club is a kind of an important decision, so maybe go and give that a look and see if there's any affiliated centres anywhere near you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you for plenty more very soon. You take care. Bye-bye.